Hey everyone, so today's video is going to be a part 2 to a video I posted a few weeks ago where I redesigned my book cover in 7 different genres, and today I'm back again with 5 more genres for a different book, all of the genres suggested by you guys. If there is a genre that you'd like to see covered in another video, let me know in the comments and I will note them. But today I'm going to be redesigning my book cover for my novel Moth Work in 5 different genres. So before we get into this video, I think it's only fair that we see the original cover before I start redesigning it. And so this is the cover of Moth Work. I'll also put it on the screen, but that's the cover. This book is kind of hard to pin down. It's like an adult genre fiction-y, literary-ish, contemporary, romancy, action-adventure-y kind of book. So let's get started with the first redesign, which is going to be a Twilight makeover. So somebody suggested that I remake my book cover in the style of some popular novels, and so I chose Twilight for the first one. This was a lot of fun to make. So I first started in Photoshop with a poster that I made when I was 15 for a grade 10 English class for Macbeth. It is just a playing card of a king, and it's kind of cut off at the head because if you've ever read Macbeth, you know why. I decided to incorporate that as sort of the symbol. Twilight has symbols on all of their covers. There's the apple, there's the flower. I used New Moon as my basis for this particular redesign. I remembered that I had this King of Hearts card on a poster, so I was like, let me just remove it because at the end of Moth Work, Harrison and Eliza, 2 of the main characters in the book, play a bit of a game of playing cards. I could have done a moth, but I didn't really think there would be a moth in the style of particular Twilight book, so that one was really simple. It was just me removing the background, and finding a font online that looked like the Twilight font was quite easy, and so that one was really simple. It didn't take me long at all. So this is the final Twilight book cover. I wasn't too sure how it was turning out, and it's not one of my favorites of the bunch, but it's still kind of fun to see my book as a Twilight book. So now let's move on to the second redesign, which is in a similar vein, except this time I'm redesigning The Hunger Games as my novel. So let's jump into how I designed this particular book cover. So I first started off with a free stock image of a moth, and this one actually worked out perfectly fine because this moth kind of looks like it's made out of gold almost. So what I did is I sort of just hastily removed it. I wasn't too particular about it because the background's black anyway. And then I started adding in these dots and sort of like the outline circles that are on the Hunger Games. It looks quite like sci-fi-ish. And so that was pretty meticulous to get it looking particularly right, but it wasn't difficult to do. And what really made this cover come to life was when I used an oil brush overlay feature, I guess. It's like a filter on the moth, and it ended up looking like a 3D rendering of like a drawing, just like the Mockingjay on the original does. So I was really happy with how that turned out. I think it actually looks really beautiful. And this actually took about an hour and a half to make. It was a lot of meticulous sort of shifting. And if you watched the last video, I said this, where book cover design for me is really just a lot of small detail work. It's a lot of just moving things around on the keyboard, resizing, using rulers to make sure everything is perfectly in line. And that was basically what this book cover entailed, because it's honestly quite simple. And so I actually had to use both my first and middle name for it to fit with my last name. My last name's quite long, so Suzanne Collins, her name is kind of congruent, so I actually had to sort of compensate for that with 2 words, but that was a bit of a minor hiccup, but I figured it out by just sort of resizing things again. So a real fun part about this book cover was making the moth into a mockingjay. So obviously moth is a big symbol, it's a big motif, and so I thought it would be perfect to use the moth in replacement for the mockingjay. So it was quite easy, like I said, with that oil brush filter. I just used the settings that were automatically there on Photoshop, so I didn't really do much to that. I think it still looks pretty cool. And then I just made the outline of a circle and used bevel and emboss and some paintbrushes in Photoshop to sort of give it the metallic look. It was actually really simple to do. And then the rest of this book cover was sort of just meticulously moving elements around on the cover, like the little dash flashes that are sort of going around the quote-unquote Mockingjay, sort of shifting the fonts over, but it was actually a lot of fun. I think this is my absolute favorite of the bunch. I think it turned out absolutely amazing. I love the Hunger Games. I've actually been really getting back into it lately. I've been watching like videos, I guess because the new one came out, so there have been like videos talking about like these particular games and like who won, like death orders and stuff, so I've been kind of like really interested in it lately. And I don't read YA anymore, but I'm thinking about like maybe rereading these books. Anyway, I actually had so much fun doing this. It was just a lot of meticulous pushing around elements on the book cover, but other than that, I think it's my absolute favorite of the bunch. So this is the final Hunger Games book cover, and like I said, I love this version of Moth Work. I wish this was the cover of Moth Work. I think it looks so legit, and I would love to get the Mockingjay like for myself, the pin. If I wanted the Mockingjay so bad, like as a young child, now I want the Mockingjay really bad. So now let's move on to the next redesign, and that is going to be for an 80s style horror novel. Let's jump into that recreation. It really didn't take any time at all. I think it's my second favorite of the bunch behind the Hunger Games one. So like I said, this is the 80s version one, so I just started with a free stock image of like a skull illustration. Really, the font is doing all the work on this book cover. It was pretty easy to make this book cover. It didn't take very long. It took me about 20 minutes, and it was really just playing around, like I said. I particularly like the image here because there's like the rose inside of the skull's eye, and so I think that's kind of like a little bit romantic. You have a little bit of the romance element, but clearly like there's bloodshed. And I use the tagline, "The dark room isn't haunted, but a dead man owns it, and they know which one," which is also the first sentence of the book, and I think it kind of added to this ominous effect, but I was really happy with that one. So this is the final book cover for the 80s horror style novel. I really like this one. I think it looks pretty legit. It looks like an actual book cover that you could like see at a bookstore, so it's like one of my favorites, definitely. So the next book cover that I'm going to be working on is a historical fiction book cover, and I was so excited to make this book cover. I was really going for the, on a lot of historical book covers, they have nice fonts, and it's a very simple image, usually of somebody like walking away in the distance. There's like a landscape. I was trying to go for that sort of grand, sweeping, dramatic kind of story just from the cover alone, and I'm actually really happy with how this one turned out. So let's dive into how I made Moth Work into a historical fiction novel. So this book cover was quite simple. I just pulled an image from Unsplash of these two men walking in the distance. I added a paper texture. It was like a vintage paper texture, so it was a bit like warmer in tone, and that ended up giving obviously the entire book cover this very vintage feel to it, which I think is very in line with the genre. A lot of this book cover was just font work, and so I chose a serif font for my name because, with these historical book covers, usually the name is quite emphasized, so I thought that could draw some attention to it. And then I chose a sans serif font for the actual title, just to sort of differentiate the title, sort of make it stand out again. But this one was very simple to make. It was really just font work and some placement. And instead of putting the tagline, "The dark room is haunted" thing, I ended up putting a line that is actually on the novel page for Moth Work, which is, "A sacrificial lamb should never have been created." And I think that kind of added to the vibe overall, but I'm really happy with this one. I think it looks like kind of professional. Like I could definitely see this in like the bargain book section being discounted at like Chapters or something. But yeah, I actually really like how the historical one turned out. So this is the final historical fiction book cover. I think it turned out really well. Like I said, I think I hit the genre conventions quite well. I was actually quite interested in doing this particular book cover because Moth Work is so far away from like a historical novel. It takes place in the contemporary world, so it's not fantastical, but it's nowhere near historical. So I think it's really interesting play on the story itself, and it kind of makes it seem kind of dramatic, mysterious, like what's going on there? I want to find out. So now let's move on to the last book cover of this video. It is a bit of a goofy one and a little bit non-serious. The other ones I think were me trying my best, but I got so many requests to do some sort of like a steamy romance, like cheesy romance book cover. I did that. Here's a reaction of me doing that live. So that was really embarrassing for me because you guys asked so insistently for this particular genre, which was like a very like kind of trashy, you know, thrift store kind of paperback. I delivered because of that. It is the most ridiculous thing I have ever made in my entire life, and I can't bear to look at it. So I'm going to try to narrate this for you, but let's jump into the final book cover, which is a cheesy romance. What I did is I found a photo of these two guys. I don't know what was happening in this picture, but I was like, this is the crux of Moth Work. This whole, please accept my rose, and then the very like apathetic reaction. Very accurate. So I just removed these dudes after I sort of added this like oil paint, same effect as I did with the Mockingjay, and I did that with the background too. It was just me adding some overlays and making this look as ridiculous as possible. And of course I chose this very like loopy font that matches the aesthetic of these kinds of books, and I think it definitely hits the mark of trashy romance. And so I can't say I'm proud of it, but you asked for it, and so here I am delivering. Some of the conventions I noticed were like adding like this bright color underneath like the main text as almost like a drop shadow. So I included that. But yeah, I don't want to make one of these again. This was an experience. It didn't take very long, but it was a lot of secondhand embarrassment. So you're welcome. I actually did have a lot of fun making it. So this is the final romance book cover. It is just as ridiculous as I thought it would be, so I hope you guys like it. It's what you asked for, and so I have tried my best to deliver. That is going to be this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, if you have suggestions for genres in the future, I'd love to continue this as a series. In total, it only took me about 2 hours and 40 minutes to make all of them. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you in another video. Bye.